Hello, everyone, linked people, and our University College guests. I'm going to go ahead and get started. So we have a meeting here at 1, so please, though, feel free to ask questions. So really let Geoff introduce himself. There's no reason for me to, he's from Australia, as you will know, from Southern Cross University, but I'll let him tell you and introduce himself. And I wanted to let you know that, so it didn't scare you, I probably didn't tell you yet. There's going to be that emergency communication thing that's going to come on at 12:30. And then the siren test is going to come on at 1.
Do I run to the bathtub?
When the siren test comes on, you're done. So just so we don't all freak out and pack our bags, because every time that sound goes on, it's like, oh, grab your purse and go. And so I don't really have to. But that's going to happen. So Holly reminded me to tell you that. So, but I'll let you tell them about you, since you're the expert on yourself. But I really enjoyed him being here. We have a lot in common about the STEM and the work that I do with Circle, so it's really been fascinating for me, and I think that you'll think so as well. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. And it's being recorded, so I have to be nice. Unlike me. And I said to several people already, but that's the only good photo of me I have, and I'm never changing it, even though I don't look like that anymore. So that's where I'm located, and I thought perhaps it might be appropriate to actually show you on a map where I'm located. There is a map before that, but it seems to have disappeared. There you go. Middle of the east coast of Australia. The university is on that little, that thing doesn't show up.
Wow. South
in Lismore, just south, 2 hours south of Brisbane, an hour's flight from Sydney. And this is what people do there.
Wow.
Its main industry is the university, and second to that's tourism. So everybody wants to be there, everybody wants to live there. Real estate is just as expensive as Sydney. So median house price $1 million if you want to go there. I can't afford it, even though I grew up there. So, and on a good day, hello, we're going? On a good day, that's another thing it's famous for. So, and because I grew up there, it seems rather logical that I went and studied things that grow in the ocean. My main interest at the time, I've been teaching for a while, and my main interest was nutrition. So I then was persuaded not to do nutritional qualifications, but to do a PhD instead. You can get sucked in pretty easily, I think. And I did this particular thing that you're all used to seeing on Japanese food, nori. Two different, completely unrelated species of marine plant. And so I did a study of those. That's where they grow. Some of that was in Japan. And it was that kind of stuff. So I did a science PhD, first up, on relationships. And funnily enough, I am now, just as of last night, coming back to this kind of analysis in my current social sciences. So I did that. I was offered a postdoc at my own university, which is the University of New South Wales, where I did that, big Sydney University. I think it's listed in the top 100 in the world, so it's a good university. And I did a 4-year postdoc based on my own work, which is nice if you can get it. After that, though, I didn't want to go and work in a garret in Uppsala, as prestigious as it is. So I went back to looking for teaching, and I got myself some experience in tertiary teaching because I'd already done primary and secondary. And then ended up working for the UNSW Global, which is a commercial arm of the University of New South Wales, in assessment. This is actually what you call an edgy business. It's not a big edgy business, but we did contract work for Pearson. Pearson did contract work for us. We have a big market in Southeast Asia on assessment. While I was there, I met this gentleman who was then just working as a research fellow, but is now Professor of Education at UNSW, Slava Kalyuga, on adaptive online e-learning. So he would be one of the best theoreticians in that there is. And he suggested I have a chat to this gentleman, now Emeritus Professor John Sweller, who's probably the preeminent cognitive load theorist in the world, who pretty was the person who started it all. If you've ever met John Sweller, he's laconic, I think is the word you might say. But I quite like him and I get along quite well with him. He's very, very direct. I saw him do a 20-minute talk with one slide once.
Oh, wow.
He doesn't have a lot of confidence in technology. However, we have continued to work together. So I started Actually, I started a master's degree in what was supposed to be assessment, because I was working for an assessment company, but actually it was about information processing in the end, and became another PhD thesis, like I needed one. So John works, and this thing's not, oh, there we go. He works on that. So he asked me to do that. So I was looking at, as a scientist, I was looking at cognitive load theory. Bit of a clash, you might think, but we got there in the end. So we'll move on. So I actually ended up doing this. I think it's going to not, oh, here it is. So I was looking at the probabilistic models for information from Shannon, and the more recent computational models, all over the computational models all along. And the probabilistic models are very influential in education. In fact, you can trace them through what you call connectionist models, or even George's connectivist models would be associated, and it'd be a flow on from that. And John Swallow took that up in a big way. But I decided that I probably needed something a little bit more hands-on, so I did a matter and energy type of information processing. I think in philosophy they call that information as stuff. But in the sciences, it's a quite common assumption that that's what you're talking about when you talk about information, but it's not in social sciences or the information sciences. It's quite different and not used very often. So I ended up with this as a model, and I've got more detail on that if anybody wants it, but basically I invented a new information system that was purely matter and energy based, with all the requisite definitions and assumptions and caveats that go with that. And it's not published very much because it's considered to be trivial and controversial, but I took it a step further and said, well, you don't need to have things organised in a pattern for information, it just has to be there. And I've developed all my research since 2013 on the basis of this work. It doesn't seem obvious, so one thing it does, though, is it sits me in the natural sciences a little bit more comfortably. It sits my view of the social sciences in the natural sciences, or the hard sciences as it's sometimes called. It opens up complex systems approaches. It sits really nicely in, and I don't know how to pronounce this guy's name, it looks Italian, but he's actually German. He's a big name in comparative studies of chimpanzee and human learning. So, and I've taken very warmly to his view of cultural accumulation, which is everything, all the knowledge, skills and experiences that you keep are your knowledge accumulation. And if that accumulates across society such that it doesn't sink, you call that process cultural ratcheting, or he does. And that enabled me to get my head around something I've been doing a long time, which was teaching, with a big broad view that says, well, that's what I'm teaching for. I'm teaching so that we can have social accumulation and so that we can maintain a cultural ratchet on that information across society. So when I'm explaining this, I have had to explain this to a huge panel of people recently, and I just went down to what I say to the guy that cuts my hair, how people learn stuff, including how you learn to cut hair, including in my experience, how people learn sport, because one of my big things in my teaching career was training people to do sport. So, and I think the guy that was here a couple of weeks ago from Ericsson's lab, Ericsson has made a career out of that. So my focus is quite broad, but I tend to think of it as how people, or how I connect with my world. So it has lots of parallels with what George does here, or what George's intention is, I suspect, but I just don't phrase it the same way, and I'm coming at it from a completely different point of view, I must admit. So the 5 things I wanted to just mention today, and you can stop me on any of these and I don't have to get through them all, but they're the 5 things that have flown on from those particular studies. They don't seem like they do, but in my head they most definitely do. I sit with that framework the whole time I'm working. So those 5, and I'll go through them one by one. There's about 3 slides on each one, just to give you a little bit of an idea of what I've been up to. And they're sequential. So I started with the top one, 2013, and the second one's gone through from then till now. Third one I started 2 years ago. Last one was just this year. That's a MOOC project. And the other one is the more recent research that I'm doing with another team. So this one, and I'll just take you through a little bit. I had access to Educational Assessment Australia's database for a while. We're still negotiating. It's an edgy business. Negotiations, not something they do very well, I'm guessing. But I had access to multiple choice questions, and I had access to a group of people that had done tests sequentially over 4 years, from year 3, your elementary school, to year 6. So I had a lovely data set. I think it was 250 of them. So what I did was I mapped the questions to the concepts based on a theory that was developed in Australia, what you have to do to access the question, what you have to do to answer the question, roughly. And map those to the question, and then in social network analysis, which we then went to, if you knock out the, oops, hello, it's going a long way further than I thought. If you knock out, not going to like me here, I'll leave that one. If you knock out the questions or the ego, you just end up with a network of concepts that are technically related to those questions. And then if you map that against test scores, and the one on the bottom left is an individual mapped on 5 questions, the red ones are the things, the concepts that they didn't know because they got that question wrong, or those questions wrong, or those concepts wrong in particular questions, and the others are right. Now, if you turn that, that's looking top down, if you turn that on its side and map them over a few years, you can get a map of how that person progressed and how far back into the past you need to go if you want to do an intervention. So the red lines on that particular diagrams are the things they got wrong all the way through the 4 years for that person. It also allows you to map that with lots of people. This is just one. And what you end up with is, well, what we published out of it was this kind of longitudinal tracking. By the way, it's a snapshot thing. You can't, there's no mathematics that does longitudinal tracking at this point. Everybody would like it to be, but there isn't. So if you look at the person who got question 10 correct, then you can look at year 5 and see what other questions they got wrong that had a related concept. So in theory, you should be able to go back to year 3 concepts and fix them up. And in theory, if you then retested, which we were about to do last year, I'll tell you why not in a minute, then you should be able to intervene such that you're covering the whole 4 years of work by backtracking. The reason that's not going ahead is because the guy that was doing it with me got headhunted to government. So he's not available anymore to do the intervention. Never mind, these things happen. So I presented this work at a Vancouver conference, and through that was connected to a group called Spatial Reasoning Study Group, which is a coalition of people started by Brent Davis and Kathy Bruce in Canada. Brent Davis is at Calgary. Kathy's now head of school at Trent. And I was invited with a colleague of mine, Joanne Mulligan from Macquarie University in Sydney, to this group. And what we've been doing with that group is analysing the gaps in spatial reasoning networks. Maybe this one's a bit, hang on, the next one might be a bit more palatable. So if you look at the top green bit, if you look at just spatial reasoning in 5 particular domains using a search in Scopus, then what you find is that mathematics is isolated. And the others, you can see they've cross connections. They're all really well connected with each other. They cite each other. So we're citing them, but they're not citing us. So the one before was a much more complicated version of saying that it actually has sizes in on how much they're citing us and how much we're citing them and so forth. But basically, we're saying, well, we're in maths education, we're in education, and we're citing everybody else, and they're not citing us. And the result of that's in a publication that I gave George a copy of last week in Educational Studies in Mathematics. And there are 2 more coming which are looking at the gaps in those particular research networks and saying, well, what's the meaning of those gaps? Do we want to fix them? How do we fix them? Is it a 2-way exchange of information? All those things. So most of that's been done over the last couple of years. And the way that works is we meet usually in Vancouver because it's easier for the Australian contingent to get there. And we sit down for 3 days and we go through things. started out with showing everybody what social network analysis was about, and then we moved on from there. And that has led a few places. This is the map of where everybody is as of last year with their connectivity, and the groups in the middle are our spatial reasoning research group members. And you can see some of them have huge connections outside this group, but what we're trying to do is look at the group and see how we can forge better connections within the group and then outside the group. So that particular diagram's one of the diagrams that's in an upcoming paper. It has led also to this grant that we just got with Joanne Mulligan and myself and Mike Mishmore and Brent Davis about connecting mathematics learning using spatial reasoning as a basis. We've been working on that for 4 years, and my role in that is to do longitudinal data tracking and map it against curriculum. So it's a complicated task. No idea how I'm going to do it. No, that's not true. Second thing I was going to talk about is that particular project that's in green at the top, but just to give you an outline, the bottom 4 are projects that I'm working on out of what we call a funding bucket from the Office of the Chief Scientist on STEM Education. So the one on the bottom right is the one that I lead. The one next to that is the one that my university leads that I work on. The other 2 are ones that I've worked on over the last 4 years. They're all related to, or the ones on the left are related to STEM resourcing, but the one I'm doing is related to processes for teaching. They're all dedicated formally to pre-service teacher education, but it doesn't always work out that way. So it's a big funding bucket, as you can see. $1 million doesn't go very far though when you split it amongst 6 universities over 4 years and have a manager. In fact, they get $30,000 a year each. That's it. So my main job is to convince them to do stuff. How are we going? So the group that I'm working with is this group, and we cover that geographic range. So distance education is huge. One of those does face-to-face only as policy. That's different. The rest of us, some of them are predominantly external and have been. UNA, University of England, has been distance education for 40 years and does almost nothing else. The rest of us are blended. And we have distance components and we have face-to-face components. So, but we cover that turf between us. It's like the size of the US. We have similar features. Now, I'll put both of these up because you'll recognise these features. I had a look at your university's demographics and features and I think, oh, they're the same. Very similar, except you're much bigger than us. My university is 15,000 total enrolment. That's probably your external. And none of those universities are large. They're all tiny. I could fit my university in this building pretty much. Play space. So that's where we're at and that's where we're working from. And the whole idea of this project is to make it obvious that the real life things that we do all the time are science and maths based. It's as simple as that. That was the premise of the whole thing. But doing that is actually quite complicated. So it has goals, and those strategies on the right were what we've been working on for the last 4 years. And we think successfully because we're all starting to change our course structures, because one of the conditions of the grant was that you embedded the results in your course structures. So obvious impact. It's designed, I designed it as a complex system coming from where I'm coming from, and I'm now looking at the outcomes of that from this project and 4 related projects as well. So we cover 25 universities between the 5 projects. I think the projects were awarded for coverage, quite honest. So this is the process that we're dealing with. It has 2 major components, and we've tried to innovate in both of them. It's a lot harder to innovate in the enhancement one, but basically we ask particular questions of scientists and mathematicians about how they solve problems and how that's different from the way people solve problems in the real world and how it's the same. We started doing that as face-to-face, but obviously if you know any scientists and mathematicians, they don't have that kind of time. They're very nice at first, and I have some really top-notch scientists to call on, not many mathematicians. So we started doing that, and it ended up being that you could then use experts that are in your community as well as the experts at the university. So there's a little branch of that where people go out to ask somebody in the community who knows some science and brings that back into the lesson. We're trying to tag it back to the real world, bring the real world back in as much as we can. There is a thing in STEM education where you say you're teaching about the real world, and we are not about. About is it. You're doing it or you're not doing it. There's no about the real world. And that's a problem. That's a huge problem. The reflection, we've done something massively different there. We used emotion-based judgments. So if you video your lesson, you go through your lesson and pick the moments when you felt most positive and most negative, and we analyse those. We have a protocol for analysing those with emotions based in psych qualifications of emotions, or we changed that though recently. And we use that as a focus where you say, well, if I wanted to keep those positive moments, how would I do that by using those criteria I had listed before? And if I wanted to get rid of the negative moments, how would I do that? It works out to be very effective if you have somebody who taught the lesson doing it and an observer. And lately we've had the teacher do it as well. And what happens is, and this is an emergent property of a complex system, they find that a real confidence boost, because when they feel negative, not everybody notices who's observing. Now, I was a bit shocked by that. I didn't think that's where a lot of the value would lie, but certainly that's where the pre-service teachers see the value as lying. The other thing they see as valuable is they all comment, and we've had no negative comments from this, by the way, hundreds and hundreds of interviews and nothing negative yet, which is fine, but there you go. They all comment that no one's ever asked us how we felt. And not only are we asking how they felt, we're saying, well, how would you change how you feel next time you did that? And what methods can we help you with to do that? So that's a huge thing. We recently tried that in international schools in Vietnam and Cambodia, because our pre-service teachers go there with the teachers. They see it as an evaluation tool. Because we all know, if you've done any teaching, you all know that those subjective evaluations where you go in and do a report in some of these classes are set up for failure, because they're just not able to be reliable or validated in any way, shape or form. Plenty of literature on that if you want. So we've developed those protocols so they can be upscaled, and they can be varied quite a lot depending on your mode of delivery. So we actually have about 15 different ways of delivering that now. In a whole lot, it's better if it's like this, if it's iterated. We found that we started with 3 iterations, 2 was fine. Everybody changes their way they teach after the first iteration, after the first reflection, and then they go into the next enhancement session with a completely different mindset. Proved extremely useful. Feedback's massively positive. Here's the problem though. It's going to be really difficult to implement this in schools, even though it's scalable, because I actually tried it with a teacher group as in service, and A, the school was not set up for video. B, they were doing it, being told they had to do it, so they weren't very cooperative. And C, they didn't realise that it's immersive. You have to go and do something. You can't sit in the professional development seminar after school and then go and put the CD in the drawer like you normally do. You have to go and do something. You have to get that videoed. You have to get 2 people to comment on it. You have to come back and do a reflection. So, but useful if you do. So what I've done since this comes up is I've got most of the projects, the whole 25 universities, and I've mapped out at their request how that works as a complex system. I won't explain it, but I'll explain the intent is to influence policy. So at the moment, we influence university education curriculum, the UEC there. That's what they're all designed to do. The boundaries of the system are dictated by the priorities of the granting structures. And then we're looking at what the blue things there are, the emergent properties from the various projects, the main ones that we see. And we're saying, well, okay, we're influencing local institutional policy and local policy, but what happens if you have to go up and you have to influence all those other policy areas? And that's a rather complicated question that we're working on now. I work a lot with a woman called Robin Keast, Professor Robin Keast, and Robin gave me these shared principles in innovation networks because that's how she changes policy in the sphere of business. So I'm working on applying that to here, and we'll be presenting that to government in June, I think. I might add though that even though they're the actual nominal policy boundaries, I think you all know, and I have some evidence for it from a social network analysis at University of Canberra, National University of Canberra, that it's particular people at particular levels that influence policy. It's not necessarily the policy level that I should be looking at. So I'll be looking very closely at that. So as it says there, this connected me to most of the key researchers in Australian Maths and Science Ed, which is massive for me. It also allowed me to work with neighbouring countries. So as I said, I've been working in Vietnam and Cambodia. I've been working with CMEO, Southeast Asian Ministry of Education Organisation, who want to upscale their work. They've got their PISA results and they're on the bottom, right? 5 of the countries in that group are on the bottom of the rankings, and they don't like that. They do have access to a lot more money than I have access to, in fact, and they've asked me to go in there and facilitate how they do baseline STEM testing, and then how do they upscale their system, train their teachers and all that kind of stuff. So I think that's something interesting for people here, actually, because I think the American system could have a lot of influence, and the grants, the things that Lisa's been telling me about, would have a lot of influence in that. What I'm directing my attention to, though, is STEM leadership models, because I don't think one academic can go and do all of that. We're a bit thin on the ground in science and maths education. There are lots and lots of schools and teachers, and I had a chat to Andy about this. So what we're trying to do is see how you can add value through collaborative inquiry. And the way that my colleagues Marilyn Chaseling and David Townsend in Canada have been doing that is they've been going and getting the school to say, well, what do you want? Or what do I want? To get the school to say it. We don't intervene in that setting of that question. So they want to add value to their teaching, and so we work with their value proposition. And that's completely turned my head around in the last year towards this, and I was speaking to Andy about it, because what as researchers are, we have a research interest, we'll have a research question, and we'll have a value that we want to add. But actually what they've been doing, Marilyn and David and the group have been doing, is to get the school to add the value at the school end, and then we might add additional value to that. But we don't set the research agenda. So, and that works terribly well for them. They've actually got 80 schools with a 140 school waiting list on that project that they're doing on leadership, and I've just converted it to STEM leadership, and probably do that in Asia. And the other thing I want to do, I'm talking to people about next week, is there is a big Latin American school for education and cognitive neurosciences that operates every year, and it's actually just a system for postdocs and doctoral students to be mentored by leaders in the field over a 1-week period, intensive in one place. It works terribly, terribly well. It's funded by the James McDonald Foundation here, who wouldn't fund a STEM school because that's not their focus, but I'll be looking for funding. And I think that would have to have worldwide leadership, even though it would be focused in one area. The Asia Pacific area is what I was suggesting. So third thing, and this is the new thing I've been working on, and one of the things I've been most interested in, and I finished my second report on that 2 days ago. So everybody saw me fretting, that was what I was fretting about. And it's based on Bronfenbrenner's models. Now, everybody talks about Bronfenbrenner, but if you go through and see anybody's actually used to collect data, show them to me, please, because I'd like to see them, because there isn't many. He's probably most cited person in the literature. But if you try to pin it down and say, well, have they actually done data collection around it? No. But coincidentally, I went to South America to visit this guy here, Professor Sebastian Lapina in Buenos Aires, and he's been using it. And he's been using it as intervention systems for early childhood education. I can give you a publication on it if you want. Massively successful over 10 years, and now he's expanded it to 4 countries. So he's a very busy man. But what he does is he has an algorithm system that his programmers have written that analyses his massive data sets to the point where they can get an interview with a parent, child and school, send the data to somebody, get it back with the intervention suggested at the end of the conversation in a half hour, which is massive, and backed it up with massive evidence. And I had a chat to him about that, and I said, well, I think probably there's a way to do networks on that, And funnily enough, I stumbled on this the following year, or the same year, where somebody had said, well, Romper and Brenner's not quite there yet, but you can network it. You can network it like this. So I had a chat to my network group and said, well, I think probably we can do it like this. Okay, so I got funding. I wanted funding for early childhood, probably like Sebastian had, but I didn't get it. But I did get funding for undergraduate retention, and I used the same system. So I mapped all of the students' proximal features. Now, somebody was talking about Maslow's hierarchies this morning. It's like compressing all of Maslow's hierarchies into one system, which is interesting in itself. It assumes that they're all there. And if you map one student, what I was interested in proving was that if the university's targeting all these risk factors that are decided on statistical analysis as single factors, and I'm thinking, well, it's rough. That's really rough, and it doesn't apply to my university. We just don't sit inside that general demographic. So I collected as much data as I could out of an archive for 2 years, mapped it all for each student. So I think we end up with 1,500 features and 8,000 students, so big map. And this is one student, and the one with all the dots and just a few lines and red dots, the bottom one, shows where the risk factors that the university is currently using sit inside the factor set of all the proximal features of a student. So if I go back, I'm just using the micro system at this point. I'll get to the other one later if you want, but I've mapped a way to do the rest, but it gets published next month. So that's just mapping the microsystem. So it shows that you can do it this way. It shows you can map all the features of the student environment. The risk factors will sit inside it. And as well as that, the one on the right, you'll see is a lot more dots on it. We found some other factors using relative risk analysis of that data set. So we found some other factors that might be relevant. And what you do with that is you make consensus networks. So you can, once you've got that network, you can do hundreds of things with it. But what we're doing at the moment is saying, well, okay, students that succeed and the students who fail. Success being the ones that are still in the course, and fail being the ones that dropped out, withdrew, or failed. And this is only the commencing student cohort, so it's really just the people starting their university life. And they're the factors shared by them. I think this cohort's actually a reasonably small cohort. This is students who are attending face-to-face at the smallest campus we have. So probably maybe 400 students. And they're all the factors that they have in common if you group the whole lot of the students together. So it's a novel thing that I've done. I don't think anybody else is doing this. So I think sometimes you can do it by what they call cluster analysis or frequency analysis statistically, but it doesn't give you a structured representation like this. So what we do is we then get the factors exclusive to the success and factors exclusive to the fail. And what we're doing is comparing those. So if you want to see what made your cohort fail, you don't look at a single factor, you look at a cluster of factors that are related to each other in those students' lives. And they're very different than what you'd think. Our university, for example, statistically, females should fail more than males, distance students should fail more than face-to-face, Aboriginal and Islands students should fail more than non. Doesn't work out that way if you look at it cohort by cohort or at our particular location. So it's what we call student-centered place-based analysis. 80% of our students are female, so statistically that's not a good data set to use to say that they're at risk. Clearly they're not at risk unless it's associated with some other factor. The one that really shocked me, and I'll show you a different kind of analysis in a minute, I thought low income, since it's given as low SES, low socioeconomic status, low income, would be a factor. No, not necessarily. It depends on what it's associated with. A lot of people with low socioeconomic status are doing quite well, thank you very much. In fact, more of them than you think. So that's been a bit massive. What we're doing at the moment, though, is we get a single fail network and compare it with the consensus success network. And this year we're going to trial interventions where you go to that student and say, this is your network right now, and this is the network of a student who's successful, and we're going to help you try and make that network look more like this network. And we're going to make the fail network look like the consensus success network. There's various ways to do that, and that's what we're experimenting with this year. So, and that's radically different than what people are doing at the moment. But our equity people think it's fantastic, and the universities want to do it too. It's just that we haven't trialed that intervention process. So we go back to student agency and say, well, if you're a student, how can you change this, and what can we give you as help so that you can change this? At the end of the day, they're the person that has to change. And so one of the guys that helped me do this analysis, I have a team of people who help with this, said, well, you can't change first in family. And I said, yes, but you can support them if that's associated with a bunch of other factors that's in their fail network. So you can provide financial support, you can do support. So agency isn't necessarily about changing. What that prints out for me at the moment, we've got it automated to the point where it'll print out the factors on the left that are success. It'll tell me what percentage of success that is actually, and it'll tell me what the ones that are fail ones on the right. And that's probably more helpful than the diagram for the equity people. They don't like the diagrams. I use the diagrams for me in a lot of ways to say, well, this is this set, and this is this set. But basically, they want a list of all the features they have to look at when they do that agency discussion. And it'll print them out for any student against any network that you pick as a success network, even a best practice network. There's quite a few ways you can do it. So as well as that, that was all behavioural analysis, right? So that's archived data on what the students actually did. We actually did do a survey of what they felt, if you like, but I based it around the social ecology, and a colleague of mine, Ben Farwood, set it up for me as structural equation modelling, and it was all about their intention to leave university. But you can see the bottom curve up, those factors that I thought would be important, economics, accommodation, family, are not. It's really quite fascinating. The big thing out of that study was how they felt about their lecturers and how they felt about their course. Now, I've been trying to match that up with the social network analysis, but it's enormously difficult because the terminology is quite different. You might have low SES here, economic ecology, but it won't necessarily mean the same as the low socioeconomic in my social network analysis. So we are trying to match it because this is how they thought they were going to do, and the other one says what they actually did, and then the same students. The other problem is this is 5%, right? You don't get much back on feedback on a survey. A survey is going 5% is massive, but it's limited. The other thing it does also help us with, and I've been using in maths because I'm doing a separate project with undergraduate maths, is it tells me what subject choices they're picking and how they're connected. That's just the maths ones, the red ones. It's really interesting that they're not, as they were in the past, restricted to particular courses. They're all cross-enrolling, right? So the cluster, those big obvious clusters there are course structures, but you can see a lot of connections between them. What we think they're doing and what the international literature suggests they're doing is, in industrialised countries, I'd like to do this and this and this right now. I'm not thinking of a career. That's just what I feel like doing. And I might be a teacher for 5 years and then I'm going to go back and I'm going to do this, this and this. And as vague as that sounds, that seems to be what people in industrialised countries are doing. They're not doing that in the non-industrial emerging nations at all. So the fourth one, a MOOC. A very complicated MOOC that my associate Carolyn is tearing her hair out over, and I don't hear the word she says about me right now. It's a feedback MOOC that's built on cognitive load principles. That's the overall structure for a module, and there are 20 modules. It's been enormously difficult to set up with the feedback loops because we didn't have funds for dedicated programming or software, so we had to use established software. Australia has this thing called Moodle, which is time for shareware. Yeah. So we've been setting up in Moodle, but we had to eventually set it up in Moodle and then shift it to a web browser run by an independent agency who collects the data for us. And we'll be running that over the next year. But two important things about it are it's set up on cognitive load principles. And the three simple things that set up onto those, worked example effect, where you show somebody a worked example and then you give them the example without the working and you do it again. That's what effectively what one little teaching module is. Modality effect, so you can have audio with that. So this particular snapshot of the animation would have an audio backing. I had to write all those scripts. Please never let me do that again, ever. And then a completion effect where if you go back here, you'll notice down, there's a little bottom loop on the bottom right where you go to faded work examples. If their score, post-test is a certain score, that means you might give them step one of the work example instead of all the steps. Or you might give them step one and then step two and they complete and then they do a worked example. We're battling with that, let me tell you, because that's actually quite hard to set up as a loop. The SPQ loop, I'll take you to that. They're the modules pre-test. It's based on work by Biggs, who I believe was Australian or is Australian. I'm not doing this component of. I'm working with a PhD student who's done this quite a lot at university already. And he does this survey at the beginning of the module and then asks questions and gives automated feedback based on average responses from previous studies. It's the best we can do if somebody's doing a self-paced learning system. I'd love some feedback on that when it's set up next week. Caroline promised me. You can do it yourself. It's pretty rough, but every single partner, and it's across those 6 partner universities, again, every single one of those people wants to use it in session 1 this year with their undergraduate courses, because like everyone across the world, we're dealing with this euphemistically called broad range of competencies. Students coming in with no maths. And it's really basic maths. So the ongoing from that is looking at Slava Kalyuga's online adaptive models, finding an industrial partner so that we don't have to do all that scripting and setting up and back-end work, which is massive. And doing that for spatial reasoning, obviously, because that's an obvious way to go. We've got 20 years of research on that from Joanne about the questions you ask and the types of answers you expect. So that's a challenging thing, but might be interesting. The other thing we've been doing, and the last thing I'll talk about, is collaborative networks. The reason I've been doing this is because since 2014 I've been working with Professor Robin Keast, who, although she works in governance and administration network structures, we work terribly well together. And in fact, I'm doing a lot of work with her team on governance and network structures, and this is where I come into her team. So sustainability, impact, obviously the big things, but that really flavours the month. But what is impact and what is sustainability and how you do it, quite another thing. So we've been looking at it from the point of view of network sustainability and network impact. And a network being 3 people, not 2 in this case. So a collaborative network is 3, a network is 2. This is my network. Dan Chamberlain, who works with us, or has worked with us the last 4 years, mapped it for me yesterday. So that's, before 2013, it was just me and Slava and John, 3 of us. That was my network for 4 years in social sciences. This is after 2013, and it sits behind us, so that's building it up, 2014, 2015, and now. And what I've been doing is actively looking at the gaps, same work that the Spatial Reasoning Network looked at before, and saying, okay, there's a group over there I want to work with. How do I set something up with that group? So you'll notice there's 2 little, very obvious little clusters. The one on the left is the Spatial Reasoning Network, and the one on the right is the one I'm working with, the MOOC setup. At the moment, there's a huge big cluster here that I'd like to be attached to as well. And Robin Keast explained to me once that she did a thesis on network and connection early 2000s, and she went and looked at it, and she has mapped her career according to how her network is developing. And I thought, can you seriously do that? And I said, yeah, you can. Sometimes you do it sort of intuitively. You say, oh, there's a group there I'd like to work with. Robin maps it first, then goes and looks. So what we've been doing is looking at that in the context of networks and sustained impact. So they're the things we're working on right now. Actually, this was actually about a year ago, so we've gone a lot further since. We haven't published any of it because we're too busy. But Robin works on this thing called an integration continuum. It's quite a common concept in business administration and governance. It's very uncommon in education. And I'm trying to sit it in an education context. So what you want, ideally, in the kind of grants that I work on is collaboration most of the time, coordination some of the time, and cooperation if people do what they're told. Most big research grants are cooperation, believe me. Somebody says, you're doing this, you're doing this, you're doing this, and have it done by December, please. What Robin works for is collaboration, and the reason she works for that is because if you want systemic change, that's the ideal, not the other two. And that's where the issue lies. So I've just blown that up a bit. And she's gone through and elaborated with a group of people that she works with on what are the things that you need to get to. And then we look at networks and examine the networks to see if that's happening or not. And that we're doing a lot of that right now. And I find that absolutely fascinating. And I think a discussion with your PhD proposal, I can't remember, Peggy Lynn, was go with what you're comfortable with and what you really like doing right now. What's the interesting question? Sustainability, network sustainability is a very interesting question because obviously there are huge institutional networks that have persisted over the last 150, 100 years in Western society. You look at those, Robin looks a lot at criminal networks, and there's a whole team of people in Australia looking at those, dark networks, and then the reverse of that is the bright networks that people talk about where, okay, it's all out in the open. What makes them survive so long? We're looking at all those kinds of things. Impact, we've got a very different definition of impact that comes from me, actually. We separate outcomes. Outcomes is a tricky word. So I've used outcomes as outcomes are behavioural changes and outputs are tangible changes that a third person can come in and look at and assess. That comes from the scientists in me. Now, as it happens, the negotiation literature has that as a very common way of looking at things, and I've convinced Robin that that's how we're looking at things. So when we're looking at impact, we want to see what outcomes that can be sustained or promoted, if you like, either directly or indirectly further down the line, and what outputs are contributing to that. So for example, if I have an output that's a publication and somebody else uses that and cites it, I have evidence that my output's been using down the line, and that's impact evidence. I'm currently battling with, as I said to several people this morning, an impact statement on the new frameworks where you have to have impact outside academia and you have to prove it. So for example, if that big project I had, I have to prove that the curriculum changes I have made have been adopted by somebody. I then have to say who it was that adopted them. I then have to say how many people are using it, and then I have to comment on whether or not they like it and whether it's going to continue to be used. And that's actually, a network model can get you there, actually. That's what we're looking at. And this is where I am going forward. They're the things I'm looking at next. I've spoken to George about the farming together one as well. And I have that top grant going in next week for review. So mapping knowledge flows across systems is a big thing for me, obviously, since I'm interested in social accumulation. And so a lot of my research directions are going there. Integrated service management is a logical follow-on from those Rod Brenner, what I call network social ecologies. We've had trouble getting people interested in that funding-wise, so we think we'll have to do a lot more explanation and a lot more publication before we can get anything major in that area. But when you look at health services or education, it's what they all want. We've negotiated with people in departments of education about it. It's what they want because they want to put things under big umbrellas. Disability services is the classic case. But they want a lot more evidence that what we're doing is going to help them, and they have a long time frame for decision making, and they're always politically based decisions. So that's where I'm at. Any questions? Welcome. Or if you want more detail on any of this, please ask me. That's just some of the things I'm doing.
Questions, comments? I mean, I know I'm very interested in, I mean, when we first talked, just because it's just so, I mean, Rothenbrenner was one, first off, when we first talked, that, you know, just the work that you're doing is just so similar to some of the things that I'm doing, that I thought you guys would find it interesting, since it's talking about how people learn in a lot of ways. People, you know, what we're doing is looking at that as well, so.
Yeah, Peg Lynn this morning was talking about success and fail networks, which I think is a crucial thing to be looking at, actually.
But Geoff will be here until the 20th. He's on this weekend.
Yep.
He's on this weekend, but he'll be here if you have any questions about anything, or would like to ask him about, maybe go read one of his papers if you want to ask him about something.
Yeah,
And
not out there, not a lot out there in press right now.
Yeah.
Things are coming.
Yeah.
I have a quick question, just out of interest. I've done some work with the University of Wollongong and University of West Sydney. Have they been involved at all in this work?
Yeah, Wollongong's in one of those big STEM projects.
Okay.
Isn't I think they're doing a module of that. We've never done any work with Sydney University. I'd very much like to do work with the obesity unit there, because their network analyst is interested in impact. And in fact, his role there is supposed to be assessing the impact of their research. So I had a big discussion with him, and probably we'll try and involve him in the Farm Central Knowledge Mobilisation Project, if that gets wings.
Yeah. And the other question I had, you know, we do a lot of work in student success. So do you have research that's come out of that that's impacted students in risk factors, longitudinal tracking, the whole mapping process as well, looking at their curriculum and their choices and that longitudinal piece?
We'd like to do that. The problem with it is convincing people that networked model is the way to go. I find there's two responses when you show a network model to people. They either get it straight away or they don't like it. And I'm accepting that. I have very good friends who I admire for their intellectual veracity, who say, what are all the dots and lines for, Geoff? I think, okay, maybe then a different approach. So it's the explanatory power of it that we're starting to look at now. And the other thing we're looking at is, well, how can you weight that network? So if you've got a success network, is one factor actually skewing that network a little bit in some way, shape or form, and therefore affecting the agency? So what you're talking about is probably a step further down the track for that particular model. We have yet to try the interventions. Be nice though.
That's really interesting what you're saying about the whole cluster perspective. Looking at it's not one single factor facet, which is what impacts student success. You know, they're looking at cluster analysis.
My recommendation from this study is that it's not going to be one single thing that impacts success. So what you have to do is look at all the factors together. It's very difficult for people to get their head around that idea. Even the guys I got working on it, who some of them come from statistical backgrounds, and they say, but which one's the most important? I said, none. You have to look at all of them. So that's when I've gone to say, well, okay, take the whole network of somebody as an image or as a list and say it's all of these things together. We have to fix all of them. And we have to make it look like those ones over here. But not any single one. You've really got to steer people away from that, because we think that's what's causing the system to be inefficient and ineffective.
Thanks, Geoff, for doing the talk. We really appreciate it.
We've got another meeting right now.
Yeah, we have another meeting in a minute. We haven't gotten a chance to give you a second. So, Linda could come this afternoon. Thanks, Geoff.
Thank you.